Just imagine living in fear every single day, looking over your shoulder, always terrified that your ex-husband is going to kill you.
Oh, wow.
And then finding out years later
Yeah.
that he was behind one of the most terrifying events in American history.
Yeah.
The D.C. sniper attacks.
The D.C. sniper attacks.
All as a cover to try and assassinate you.
Yeah. That was Mildred Muhammad's life.
It's crazy.
And that's what we're going to dive into today. We're going beyond those headlines and into a story that often gets lost in the, retelling of those sniper attacks.
It's a story about domestic abuse, manipulation, and how a regular, normal, seemingly ordinary relationship can turn into something truly horrifying.
Yeah. You see, the D.C. sniper case is so much more than just, a series of shootings or string of shootings. It's about a pattern of abuse that went unnoticed for years.
Let's start with Mildred.
Okay.
She was only 23 years old back in 1983.
Wow.
Living a pretty normal life in Baton Rouge. Working, going to church.
Yeah.
And that's when she met John.
She met John at a grocery store.
At a grocery store.
Yeah. Yeah.
And initially, it seemed like he was just too good to be true. Right?
She describes him as charming, attentive. He'd take her fishing, was incredibly kind to her mother. And he would even share these carefully crafted stories about his, difficult childhood. So he was really putting on, a good show.
It sounds almost like it's straight out of a textbook.
Exactly.
About how abusers operate.
Classic.
They use that charm and vulnerability to lure you in.
Exactly.
Make you feel safe.
You want to care for them,
Yeah.
feel bad for them, and then slowly they start to reveal their true nature.
And in John's case, these red flags started popping up almost right away.
Almost immediately.
Yeah.
One of the first major ones was that he was still married.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Mildred's friend, Valina,
Okay.
who worked with her, actually knew John's other girlfriend.
What? So he was juggling multiple relationships
At the same time.
while he's trying to date Mildred.
Exactly.
Oh my gosh.
And when she confronted him about it, he totally downplayed it. He even staged this whole dramatic confrontation with this other girlfriend.
Oh, wow.
And made Mildred be the one to choose between the two.
Oh my gosh. He flipped it all around.
It's classic manipulation.
Yeah.
Abusers use these tactics to shift the blame,
Yeah.
to create drama, make the victims feel responsible for their behavior.
And then, there was the issue of him not being able to read.
Yeah.
Imagine finding out
You imagine?
that this man who is so confident,
Yeah.
seemingly articulate,
Right.
can't even read.
Couldn't read.
I mean, how did he graduate high school?
I know.
How did he get into the Army?
He was incredibly good at hiding it.
Wow.
Using his sharp memory, his manipulation skills, he'd memorize passages.
Wow.
He'd get others to read things for him, and he would claim that he just, liked the way it sounded. Oh my gosh.
So he had all these kind of excuses.
Wow, that's scary how resourceful he was.
It is, yeah, in a very sinister way.
Yeah. Did Mildred even realize these red flags for what they were at that time?
Like many victims of abuse,
Yeah.
she rationalized his behavior.
Uh-huh.
She saw his illiteracy as something that she could help him overcome, a need she could fulfill.
Right.
She wanted to believe the best in him,
Yeah.
to see past these flaws.
It's so common to want to believe that someone you love is capable of changing. You ignore those warning signs
You do.
because you're emotionally invested.
Right.
You're in it.
And abusers are masters at exploiting that hope,
Yeah.
that desire to see the good in them. They use it to draw their victims in deeper and deeper into their web of control.
So even with all these red flags, Mildred and John still ended up getting married.
They did.
Is that when things took a darker turn?
Well, there was a brief period when John was stationed at Fort Lewis.
Okay. And they were separated, but he convinced her to join him, promising a fresh start.
Yeah, a fresh start.
Yeah.
That's such a powerful motivator,
It is.
especially when you're in a difficult situation.
Exactly.
It's easy to see why she would want to believe that,
Right.
things could get better.
And initially, things seemed okay.
Yeah.
But after John returned from his deployment in the Gulf War, that's when the marriage really began to unravel.
I mean, the Gulf War, that was a really traumatic experience.
For many soldiers.
For a lot of people, yeah.
Yeah.
Could that have played a role in his behavior, you think?
It's certainly possible.
Yeah.
PTSD is a very real consequence of war,
Yeah.
and it can manifest in many ways, including anger, irritability, having difficulty controlling those emotions.
Yeah, so we can't diagnose him.
Right. But it's important to consider.
Yeah, it's an important factor.
How that experience may have impacted his behavior.
How did that manifest in his relationship with Mildred?
He became withdrawn, prone to these fits of rage, and increasingly controlling.
Okay.
He would blame Mildred for things that weren't her fault, criticize her constantly, and just belittle her.
It's that classic cycle of abuse.
Classic.
The abuser uses that manipulation and verbal abuse to chip away at their victim's self-esteem, make them feel completely dependent.
And Mildred was already vulnerable and isolated. And she was really struggling to cope with this.
Did she try to reach out to anyone for help?
She did. She confided in an imam at her mosque, hoping for some guidance and support.
It's so sad how often people turn to, religious leaders.
Yeah.
Only to be met with judgment.
Right.
Or a lack of understanding about what domestic abuse really is.
In this case, instead of offering her support, this imam chose to confront John directly, which only made things worse.
Wow. That kind of intervention, it's well-intentioned.
Of course.
But it can be so dangerous.
It can.
It further isolates the victim, and it just makes the abuser angrier.
Exactly.
So instead of getting help, she's even more isolated.
She is
feeling trapped.
Trapped in this cycle of abuse that seemed impossible to escape.
Yeah. So we have Mildred trapped. Absolutely trapped in this nightmare. She's desperately looking for help.
Yeah.
But she's finding herself even more isolated.
Right.
And John, fueled by all these things, all these demons, is just tightening his grip on her life.
Yeah.
Where does Lee Malvo fit into all of this?
His story is a really tragic example of how vulnerability and that desperate need for connection can be exploited by someone like John.
Even before he met John, his life was full of instability and trauma.
Yeah.
What can you tell me about his early years?
Born in Jamaica, his early childhood was really chaotic. There was a lot of upheaval, a lot of abandonment. When he was just 6 years old, his father left for the Cayman Islands, leaving this void in his life that really was never filled.
Yeah, to have your father just ripped away at 6 years old, that must have been really hard for him.
Absolutely, and the instability didn't end there.
Oh, no.
Lee and his mother moved constantly.
Okay.
They bounced between Jamaica and Antigua.
Wow.
Often relying on relatives or even strangers just for shelter.
So he never really had a place to call home.
Exactly. And there were these heartbreaking moments where you can see just how deeply Lee craved that stability and affection.
Okay.
There's a story about his mother forcing him to abandon his cat.
Oh.
And it sounds small, but for a kid who's experiencing that much loss, that betrayal is incredibly damaging.
Yeah.
It really shows the emotional neglect that he endured.
Right. So all of these early experiences really shaped how he saw the world.
Exactly.
He was longing for connection. For someone to just be there.
Yeah.
And give him the guidance that he needed.
He craved it.
And that's exactly the kind of vulnerability that John just preyed on.
Absolutely.
How do they even meet?
So fast forward to 2001.
Good.
Lee's living with his mom in Antigua, still searching for that sense of belonging.
Right.
Meanwhile, John had lost custody of his kids in this bitter court battle.
Oh, wow.
And he fled there with them.
He kidnapped his own kids.
Yeah, he kidnapped his own kids.
And fled the country.
He fled to Antigua.
Wow. He was really willing to do whatever it took.
It's a pattern.
To get what he wanted.
Throughout his life.
Yeah.
Operating outside the law.
Right.
Manipulating, exploiting others.
To get his way.
To get what he wanted.
But how does he even bring Lee into this?
So John, always the master manipulator.
Right.
He saw Lee's vulnerability immediately. He saw this lonely kid, this neglected teenager who was hungry for connection, and he just swooped right in, offering him guidance, that fatherly figure, a sense of purpose.
It's almost like he saw Lee as this blank slate
that
he could manipulate.
Mold him.
Yeah, mold him to his own purposes.
Precisely. He filled his head with these grandiose stories about his time in the military, his survival skills, and just painted this distorted picture of the world where he was the victim.
So he was creating a narrative to justify everything he was doing.
Exactly.
And pulling Lee into it.
Indoctrinating him into this twisted belief system.
And it worked.
It worked.
I mean, Lee, he was desperate for attention.
Right.
He wanted someone to believe in him.
Yeah.
So he latched onto that twisted reality.
He did.
And saw John as this mentor, this father figure.
The only one who understood him.
Yeah, it's classic grooming, right?
Classic.
This predator just taking advantage of his need for connection and acceptance.
Right.
Did he reveal his plans about the attacks to Lee at this point?
Not explicitly.
Okay.
He was calculated, he was methodical, gradually eroding Lee's morals, distorting his sense of right and wrong.
It's like a slow drip of poison.
Exactly.
Just changing his view of the world.
He started by emphasizing personal empowerment.
Okay.
He encouraged Lee to train his body, read books, develop a sense of discipline.
It's almost like he was creating a self-help program.
Yeah, it sounds that way.
To appeal to Lee's desire for self-improvement.
Right.
So how did he go from the self-help stuff to planning these attacks?
It was all about normalization.
Okay.
He started by involving Lee in petty crimes, slowly escalating the severity of their actions.
So he was desensitizing him to crime.
Making it seem justifiable response to the injustice
that they were supposedly experiencing.
That's right.
So their bond is getting stronger.
Yes.
John's introducing him to firearms. They're going to the range.
Taking him to shooting ranges.
Giving him that power, that control.
Yeah, emphasizing that.
That comes with using a gun.
That's right.
And this is where John's true motive starts to come out.
Yeah.
He starts talking about targeting certain groups of people.
Right.
People that he sees as representing the injustice he's faced.
Exactly. So beneath these pronouncements about society's injustices,
there's this personal vendetta brewing underneath.
That's right.
So as they're training more, John reveals his plan.
The plan.
A series of attacks.
Seemingly random.
That are supposed to terrorize D.C.
Yes.
But that wasn't the goal. Right.
But the end goal.
They were distractions.
The smoke screen.
Yeah, to cover up the real objective.
Exactly.
Which was to kill Mildred.
That's right. He wanted her to pay for leaving him, for defying him.
I wanted her, right.
He wanted her to pay the ultimate price.
Wow, that's really scary.
It is.
It shows how far an abuser will go for revenge.
There was no bad.
He wanted to punish her.
That's right.
And anyone who defied him. To do anything.
To commit these horrific acts.
And he thought he could use this to make himself look like a mastermind.
Exactly. Controlling everything from the shadows.
Yeah.
He wanted that notoriety.
He wanted that fear.
He wanted the power.
That came with it.
Yes.
So now he's got Lee, who's willing to help him.
Right.
But how do they go from these fantasies to actually doing it?
Ugh. It takes a dark turn.
Yeah.
John starts laying the groundwork. Meticulously planning. He gets weapons, maps out targets, grills Lee constantly.
So he's turning Lee into a weapon.
Yeah, stripping away his individuality, making him an extension of himself.
And as they get ready to do this, there's just this sense of dread.
Right.
They're about to cross a line.
They're about to unleash terror.
And change people's lives forever.
Forever.
It's a really sobering thought.
It is.
And it brings us to those terrifying days in D.C.
Yeah.
What was it like for the people there? How did this reign of terror play out? And how did they manage to evade capture for so long?
That's what we'll uncover in the final part.
Okay.
Get ready, because it gets dark.
So we left off with John and Lee getting ready, getting everything in place to unleash their reign of terror.
Right.
It's October 2002.
October 2002.
And D.C.'s about to become the backdrop for this horrific chapter.
Right. Imagine the fear just gripping this community.
Yeah.
Seemingly random shootings, people going about their lives, pumping gas, mowing the lawn, a child getting off the school bus.
Oh, my God.
All suddenly becoming targets.
Yeah, it's that randomness, the not knowing who was next.
Exactly.
That made it so terrifying.
It just shattered any sense of normalcy and turned just everyday things into moments of dread.
Their first attack, though, wasn't actually in D.C.
It wasn't, no.
It happened a month earlier.
September 5th.
Outside a liquor store in Alabama.
Right. Montgomery, Alabama.
Montgomery, Alabama.
Yeah.
So was that a test run?
It's possible.
It's just a way to get their act together.
Yeah.
Before going to D.C.
They shot and killed a woman and injured another as they were leaving work.
Oh, my God.
It seemed random, but it was just the beginning.
It was the start of something horrible.
Yeah, and even in those early attacks, you can see those echoes of John's abusive tactics, using that violence to instill fear.
Right.
To control, to make people feel powerless.
Like what he did to Mildred.
Yeah.
Just on a larger scale.
Exactly.
So they take their operation to D.C.
To D.C.
They pick their targets. The times, the locations.
Articulous.
Strike and then vanish.
Yeah, chilling precision.
Did the police have any idea what was going on?
At first, there's a lot of confusion.
All right.
Some witnesses said they saw a white van.
A white van.
A white van leaving some of the scenes.
Wow.
And that sent the police on a wild goose chase.
So one little detail that wasn't even right.
One detail changed everything.
Completely shaped the investigation. Meanwhile, John and Lee are just blending in.
Driving their blue Caprice.
They were invisible.
And were
in all the chaos.
Amidst the chaos that they created.
It's like they were using the media, the pressure, to find answers.
For their advantage.
Yeah, to help themselves.
Yeah, and as the body count rose, so did the media coverage. And of course, the experts came out.
Oh, yeah. What were they saying?
You know, a lot of them focused on that lone wolf idea.
Okay.
A white male driven by some psychological need.
Yeah.
They compared him to past serial killers.
Oh, wow.
And completely missed the mark on who was really behind it.
It just shows how those biases can really cloud our judgment.
It's dangerous.
Even when it matters most.
Even when the stakes are so high.
Yeah, and while the nation's looking for this phantom, John and Lee are continuing their reign of terror.
Right.
They're leaving messages, taunting the police.
They were playing a deadly game.
It's like a cat and mouse game, but with people's lives.
Exactly.
And we can't forget that John's real goal was to get to Mildred.
His vendetta.
Yeah, it wasn't random.
He was orchestrating her assassination.
It's crazy how close he got to doing it.
He was close.
So how did it all end?
How did they finally get caught?
Yeah.
It's almost ironic. It wasn't some brilliant police work.
Uh-huh.
It was their own arrogance, their need to control.
They couldn't just stay quiet.
They couldn't.
They had to make themselves known.
John started leaving messages.
Okay.
Making demands, trying to be in charge of the investigation.
You wanted to be the mastermind.
He wanted the credit for all the fear.
And that led to their capture.
It did. One of those messages led investigators to a shooting in Alabama.
Okay.
And they found a fingerprint. On a magazine. Wow. And it belonged to Lee Malvo.
So one tiny detail brought the whole thing down.
It often does. The smallest thing can break open the biggest cases.
And once they had Lee, they knew about John.
It was only a matter of time.
What about Mildred? Did she know what John was doing?
It's hard to say for sure when it all clicked for her.
Right.
But she was really helpful in helping the police understand John.
Understand his motives.
Yeah, his history, his twisted thinking.
So she helped bring an end to the terror that was aimed at her.
It really emphasizes how important it is to listen to survivors.
Yes.
To see those patterns of abuse.
Yeah.
It reminds us that violence can take so many forms.
Yeah.
From the small things to the horrific.
So they're arrested. It's finally over.
The reign of terror ended.
But the story keeps going.
It doesn't end there.
What happened to them after they were caught?
John was tried, convicted, sentenced to death.
Wow.
He was executed in 2009.
And Lee.
His case is more complex.
Okay.
The focus was on how much John had brainwashed him.
Right. He was so young when they met.
He was a child.
Easily influenced him.
Yeah. And while what he did was horrific, he was also a victim of John's abuse.
What was his sentence?
He was spared the death penalty and sentenced to life in prison.
It's a sad ending for someone who was just looking for connection.
It is. He became a pawn in this deadly game.
And Mildred.
Yeah.
She's left with all the trauma.
And the knowledge that she was the target.
Yeah, this case really shows us that violence can come from anywhere.
It's not always what we expect.
It reminds us to pay attention.
To the signs, to the red flags.
Listen to survivors.
And to stand up against abuse.
To create a society that takes this seriously.
This has been a tough topic.
It has.
But it's so important to talk about these things.
It is.
The attacks were a tragedy.
A national tragedy.
They shook D.C. to its core.
Yeah.
But it all started with abuse.
Years of it.
We have to learn from this.
You have to
protect those who are vulnerable.
As we wrap up today.
Yeah.
I want you to think about this. What can we do as individuals, as a society, to stop these stories from happening?
How can we make sure stories like Mildred's are heard and believed?
Before it's too late.
Before it escalates.
Before something horrific happens.
That's the question we all need to be asking.